At one of our board meetings a couple of months ago, our board voted, to my great delight, to enter into a formal partnership with Kehilat Har-El, into a partnership to make a shidduch, a combination between us as sister congregations, so that they will now be our sister congregation in Israel. Har-El is the oldest Reformed synagogue in Israel and one of the most prominent Reformed synagogues in Jerusalem. I've been there many times. It has a great spirit, and Cantor Cohen has taken it in many ways to new levels. We first met my first year of rabbinic school and his first year of rabbinic school when we were both enrolled in the rabbinic program. And there are a lot of different versions to the story of how my friend Evan began in the rabbinic program, but then finished his studies as a cantor. The story that I most adhere to is that our names being in alphabetical order, we were given a list of who was going to do the sermons on which particular Shabbat, and my name ending in B, his name ending in C, I immediately preceded him. So I gave a sermon one week, and he said, I can never live up to, I can never do that. And he dropped out and said, maybe I'll sing.
So humble.
Nobody else adheres to that version of the story.
Including yours truly.
The real story is that I admire him a great deal more than he could ever admire me, because while we both fell deeply in love with the land of Israel, Evan decided that he couldn't live without it even for a moment and chose to make Aliyah. And once he moved to Israel, he found that it would be perhaps more expedient to enter into the cantorate as opposed to the rabbinate. And as you heard, we are all very fortunate that he became a cantor. We've been friends for almost 20 years. I've admired him, as I told his congregation when I spoke there and gave a sermon there, my first ever sermon in Hebrew. I don't know that anyone understood it, but I gave a sermon there in Hebrew and told them how much I admire him, his passion for Zionism, his love for Torah, and his acceptance as a real champion of the Reform movement and liberal Judaism, especially in Jerusalem, which is not necessarily so easy. There are a myriad of ways that all of us can participate in deepening this relationship with our new sister congregation. Cantor Cohen will be here through Tuesday on campus. On Wednesday, he'll be traveling to the biennial with us, but if you'd like to meet with him, if you want to learn more about Reform Judaism in Israel, and if you're interested in how you can help, let him know after services. He'd be delighted to meet with you over the next few days. But it's a great honor now to welcome, to share words of Torah, my good friend from Jerusalem, Cantor Evan Cohen.
Shabbat Shalom to everyone. You all hear me fine? Okay. So thank you again, Shabbat Shalom, and thank you so much for welcoming me to your community. It's truly an honor to be here at the invitation of my dear friend, Rabbi Jeremy Barras. When Rabbi Barras invited me to speak this evening, and I looked at this week's Parsha, Vayeira, I was immediately brought back to the days when we were classmates at Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem. We were both first-year rabbinical students before I saw the light and decided to become a cantor. And we, the two of us, were sitting together in the Introduction to Rashi class with Rabbi Ben Hollander of blessed memory. One of the first lessons we had concerned this week's Torah reading. When I asked Rabbi Barras if he remembered this, he told me, Evan, I don't remember a thing from Ben's class. Now, perhaps it was the passage of time, since it was 18 years ago, or perhaps it was due to one too many rounds of golf at the Caesarea golf course. But to refresh his memory and to share such a relevant passage today with you, I invite you to have a listen. In this week's portion, we learn of Isaac, miraculously born to Sarah and to Abraham. And for a number of reasons suitable for a sermon at a different time, Sarah then banishes Abraham's maidservant Hagar and her son Ishmael, who happened to also be Abraham's firstborn son. And so we read from Genesis 21. Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. The water in the bottle then ran out, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. She then went and sat down opposite him a good way off, as if it were a bowshot, for she said, "Let me not see the death of the child." She then sat opposite him, lifted up her voice, and wept. God then heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad and hold him in your hand, for I will make him a great nation." God then opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the bottle with water and gave the lad to drink. Now listen again to this one verse. This is verse 17. God then heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is." Our teacher Ben then asked us in Hebrew, "Ma kasheh Rashi?" What's bothering Rashi? The words "where he is" seem superfluous. For the verse could simply read, "Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad." Period. End of the verse. Why is there "where he is"? If it looks superfluous and it sounds superfluous, then it's not superfluous, but rather an excuse to write a sermon. Rashi, the master biblical commentator from France in the Middle Ages, shares with us a midrash from the commentary Genesis Rabbi, which sheds light on these three words in Hebrew, "Ba'asher hu sham," where he is. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the angels up in the heaven, at least when portrayed by our sages, are not chubby little kids in diapers sitting on clouds, playing the harp, in eternal bliss, singing God's praises. Rather, they are often very adversarial, almost, pardon the expression, the devil's advocate, and could even be downright bloodthirsty, from cheering when Egyptian soldiers drown in the Red Sea, which of course earns them a divine rebuke, to here in this case, where they have the audacity to question God for saving Ishmael. This is the quote from Genesis Rabbah. "For the ministering angels were accusing and saying, 'O Lord of the universe, for one who is destined to kill your children with thirst, you are bringing up a well?' And God answered them, 'What is he now, righteous or wicked?' They replied, 'Righteous.' God then said to them, 'According to his present deeds, I judge him.'" Rashi then adds a quote from Tractate Rosh Hashanah from the Talmud, and this is the quote, "According to the deeds that he does now, he is judged, and not according to what he is destined to do." It's important to share here that although both Jewish and Islamic tradition view Ishmael as the father of the Arabian people, at press time, neither Rashi nor our sages were referring to the Arab-Israeli conflict, although it sure seems like some sort of premonition for the events of current times. But nonetheless, this teaching by Rashi, shared by Rashi, is incredibly meaningful today on so many levels. We are accountable for our actions, and others are no less accountable as well. However, the future is wide open. And therefore, if God doesn't judge humanity by potentially future actions, what we could or might do, shouldn't we do the same? Indeed, our first gut reaction might be like that of the angels, which is completely understandable. But we, created in God's image, need to act differently. And all the more so towards those mentioned in this midrash by name, whom in Hebrew we call our Bnei Dodim, our first cousins, whom of course are the descendants of Ishmael. This week we mark the yahrzeit of Yitzhak Rabin, former Prime Minister of Israel, who was assassinated 20 years ago by one of our own, a fellow Jew. Here on the Bima isn't the forum to discuss whether or not the specific path Rabin took was the right one, though as an Israeli you can safely assume that I have very strong feelings about the matter. But regardless of how you interpret how history has unfolded, it's clear to me that Rabin's vision for peace was one that included this optimistic view of the future: that both God and us cannot judge others on what might be, even if at the moment it seems that we all know what the future brings. As we learn from Pirkei Avot, from the Ethics of the Fathers, all is foreseen, but free will is granted. This paradox is directly connected to the Midrash that I shared. Free will, that which is granted to us by God, is the ability by everyone to change their destiny. In other words, it's only destiny if we don't work to change it. Indeed, as the words of Hatikva, Olo adva tikvateno, our hope is not lost. I would like to conclude with a true story, a story of hope, from only 2 weeks ago. Amar, a Palestinian resident of the Abu Tor neighborhood of Jerusalem, is Kehilat Har-El's, my synagogue, the synagogue's caretaker. Normally, Amar would take the bus from his neighborhood to Kehilat Har-El, which is located in downtown Jerusalem. However, in light of the recent wave of terror, Amar told us that he felt much safer walking to work rather than going on the bus. One of our congregation's t-shirts, since of course it is in Hebrew, saying Kehilat Har-El, and would make him look a little less suspicious when walking through town. Apprehensively, yes. The stranger then followed up by asking, "Do you know Evan?" Now, of course, every Cantor likes to be recognized by strangers. Especially, he's my friend. May the words of our sages of old and these little moments of humanity today provide both hope and comfort at this difficult time and be a source of strength to us all. Shabbat Shalom.